Most people lose power the moment they start explaining themselves. And the strange part is, they think they're gaining it. Why is it that the people who talk the most often get ignored, while the people who say almost nothing seem to control the entire room? What do they understand that most people don't? And why does silence feel so uncomfortable unless you know how to use it? Ethan didn't always understand this. In fact, he used to believe the opposite. He thought being heard meant speaking more, explaining more, clarifying more, proving more. At work, in friendships, even in love, he had a habit of filling every silence before it had a chance to breathe. If someone misunderstood him, he rushed to explain. If a conversation felt tense, he talked to smooth it over. If he felt dismissed, he spoke louder, not in volume, but in effort. More words, more reasons, more attempts to be understood. And at first, it felt logical. After all, if people don't get you, you explain yourself. If they doubt you, you defend yourself. If the room goes cold, you warm it with words. That's what most people do. That's what most people are taught to do. But slowly, Ethan noticed something painful. The more he explained himself, the less people seemed to value what he said. In meetings, he would present an idea, then keep talking, adding details, justifying every angle, trying to make it airtight. By the end, the room looked less convinced than when he began. In arguments, he would explain his intentions over and over, hoping the other person would finally say, "Okay, I understand." But somehow, his effort made him look weaker, not clearer. Even in casual conversations, he noticed how quickly people interrupted him, drifted away, or responded with half-interest. It was subtle, but it happened enough times to leave a mark. Have you ever felt that? Like the more you try to be understood, the less people actually listen? Like every extra sentence somehow reduces your weight. It confused him, because Ethan wasn't lying. He wasn't manipulating anyone. He was just trying to be fair, trying to be clear, trying not to be misunderstood. But somewhere along the way, his need to explain became visible, and people can always feel need. That was the part no one told him. Words do more than carry meaning. They reveal emotional position. They expose whether you are centered or seeking approval, calm or afraid, grounded or trying to control how others see you. And people respond to that faster than they respond to logic. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan sat across from his manager in a glass-walled office. It was supposed to be a simple feedback conversation, but then came the sentence that stayed with him for weeks. "You're smart," his manager said, "but sometimes you talk past your point." He smiled politely, but inside something tightened. Talk past your point. He replayed it all night. At first it sounded unfair, then it sounded true, because he knew exactly what his manager meant. Every time Ethan had a good idea, he kept going until it sounded uncertain. Every time he made a solid point, he covered it with 10 smaller ones, hoping none of them could be attacked. He thought he was making himself stronger, but he was doing the opposite. He was showing that he didn't trust the silence after his own words, and that silence was where power lived. Most people are afraid of silence because silence feels like loss of control. When you stop talking, you can't manage what comes next. You can't soften your image. You can't force understanding. You can't rescue yourself from judgment. You have to sit there, exposed, waiting. And that is exactly why silence is powerful. Because the person who can remain quiet without shrinking sends a signal most people instantly recognize. I do not need to chase your validation. That signal changes everything. A week later, Ethan got another chance to test this without planning to. He was in a team meeting, and one of his coworkers challenged one of his proposals. Normally, Ethan would have jumped in immediately. He would have defended the details, explained the context, filled the air before doubt had a chance to spread. But this time, something in him paused. He answered with one sentence, calm, simple, direct. Then he stopped. The room went quiet. At first, the silence felt unbearable. He could almost feel his old instincts clawing at him, begging him to keep talking, to add more, to protect himself from the discomfort. But he didn't. He just sat there. And then something unexpected happened. People leaned in. His coworker, who had come in with confidence, suddenly started explaining himself. Another team member spoke up in support of Ethan's idea. The conversation shifted, not because Ethan dominated it, but because he didn't. That moment stayed with him, not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed something hidden. The person who talks less often appears stronger because they seem less emotionally dependent on the outcome. That's the psychological truth most people miss. Power is not just about what you say, it's about whether your behavior suggests inner stability. And over-explaining often sends the opposite message. It tells people you are not just communicating, you are negotiating for acceptance. You are trying to close every possible gap before someone can use it against you. But powerful people understand something different. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every silence needs to be filled. Sometimes the fastest way to lose authority is to speak from urgency, and sometimes the fastest way to gain it is to let your words end before your insecurity begins. Why does this happen so often? Because many people don't speak to express, they speak to relieve anxiety. They explain because they fear being judged. They overshare because they fear being ignored. They defend because they fear being seen the wrong way. They keep talking because silence makes them feel small. But silence doesn't make you small. It reveals whether you already feel small inside. That realization hit Ethan hardest in his personal life. One night, during an argument with someone he cared about, he noticed the same pattern rising in him again. The urge to explain every intention, every detail, every reason he wasn't wrong, or at least not as wrong as he sounded. He could feel the pressure in his chest, that old fear of being misunderstood, that old loneliness of not being seen fairly. And then he stopped. Not to punish, not to withdraw, not to manipulate, just to stop defending himself beyond what was true. He said what mattered, nothing more. And for the first time, the conversation changed. The tension didn't disappear instantly, but his presence did. He no longer felt like a man begging to be interpreted correctly. He felt anchored, clear, harder to pull apart. That was the twist. Saying less was never about becoming cold. It was never about acting distant or mysterious. It was about removing the extra words your fear adds. Because most of what weakens us is not the truth we speak, it's the panic we attach to it. Have you noticed that the most confident people rarely rush? They rarely over-clarify. They rarely throw endless words at a room hoping to control perception. They speak, then they let the message stand. Not because they know they'll always be understood, but because they know their worth doesn't collapse when they aren't. That is real power. And once Ethan saw it, he couldn't unsee it. He started noticing it everywhere. The friend who said one honest sentence instead of 10 defensive ones. The leader who answered criticism without turning it into a speech. The person who could sit in a pause without trying to rescue themselves from it. These people carried weight, not because they were louder, but because nothing in them seemed to be reaching. That's what makes saying less so powerful. It forces your words to carry themselves. It separates truth from performance. It makes people pay attention because attention naturally moves toward what is controlled, not what is scattered. And maybe that's why so many people miss it. We live in a world that rewards noise, more opinions, more reactions, more explaining, more proving. But deep down, human psychology hasn't changed. We still trust what feels steady. We still respect what does not beg. We still feel the difference between someone speaking from clarity and someone speaking from fear. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself past the truth, Stop for a second. Ask yourself, am I speaking to communicate or to calm my own anxiety? Am I adding value or just adding words? What would happen if I said what mattered and let silence do the rest? Because in the end, power is not in saying more until people finally accept you. Power is in knowing that your truth does not need endless decoration. Silence doesn't mean weakness, it means control. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who knows exactly when to stop talking. If this made you think, subscribe to Brain Equity for more quiet truths most people never notice.